I kind of saw this coming, and I thought I need to give at least 2 days to Ecclesiastes, but I didn't. So we're just going to kind of try and squeeze it all into this morning, if that's possible, which it really isn't. I don't know of any Bible book that you can really get the whole scope on to start with, even if you've got a year. So let's just see what we can do with Ecclesiastes this morning. This is one of my favorite books in all the Bible, and it's a challenge sometimes to figure out what Solomon is trying to say, but that's all right, because one of his themes is you can't figure everything out. And I'm glad he put that in here several times. In the first part of the handout, I've got 5 repetitious ideas that Solomon keeps coming back to. The first one is vanity, or some kind of an idea. The English word vanity is used several times, but also the word futility. And your translation, if it's different, might have something else, but it all comes down to the same thing, that there's an emptiness that can't be filled. But where can it not be filled? Can't be filled under the sun. That's one of the other themes. And if you check that out in number 3, under the sun is there at least 29 times. And I say at least because I always leave the possibility open that I might have missed one. But I know I counted 29 times. Solomon talked about everything that's going on under the sun. What does vanity mean? What's that?
Futility or emptiness.
Futility or futility? Futility. What does futility mean? Did I hear a definition down here? In vain, yeah, vanity is in vain, but what does it mean when something's just in vain? What? Pointless. Pointless. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to make any difference. It's empty. There's nothing to it. And Solomon uses that idea 27 times at least as he writes this document down for us. What do you think his impression is of life under the sun? What's that mean? Why would God inspire the wisest man that ever lived, except for Jesus, of course? Why would he inspire Solomon to write down these things? Everything is vain, everything is futile under the sun. What's the context? Okay, so we would pursue Christ. I don't think this is cheating in this context, but what's Solomon's conclusion? And you can go down to the end of the handout if you want, or the end of the Ecclesiastes is even better. What's that? Fear God and keep his commandments. That's what he comes down to. Now, if fearing God, pursuing Jesus, has meaning, then how can he say that everything is vain?
The essence of mankind trying all these things is vain. It's not that fearing God is vain.
Okay.
Everything you're trying to do or prove here of what your desires are, everything without God, it's hopeless.
In the context of Ecclesiastes, how would we say it? Everything
Grasping wind.
Under the sun, grasping wind, because he uses that too, striving after wind. How many times? 7 times at least. He talks about striving after wind. You can't catch the wind. So, what's he saying?
The term under the sun not mean earthly things?
Yes. That's what I believe. Under the sun means down here. He's not talking about up there, above the sun. He's talking about down here on the earth. As a matter of fact, that's a phrase he throws in once or twice, on the earth, rather than under the sun. So looking at everything under the sun and looking at some of these repetitious phrases, especially number 4. I love number 4. That gives me a great deal of encouragement. What do we want to do with everything? We want to figure it out. Why did this happen? How come things are the way they are? One of the reasons I got out of the military, and the military is good, but I got out of the military, and one of those main reasons was if anything went bad, what did they tend to look for? Anybody know? Who to blame? It wasn't about, all right, let's fix this problem. Oh, this guy made a mistake over here. Let's see if we can get some better training. No, this guy made a mistake. Let's take some stripes and let's throw him in the brig or whatever we want to do to bring about some punishment. That's not the way you work it. As a matter of fact, one of the things I learned while being a supervisor in the military is that if a guy makes a mistake on a job, he's the one I want to put on that same job next time, because what's he not going to do next time? He's not going to make that same mistake. So rather than punish somebody for making a mistake, unless the guy's just totally irresponsible, if he comes in drunk or if he's not paying attention or he's horsing around, that's different. That's different. But if you're doing your job and you make an honest mistake, all right, you made an honest mistake. We're not going to resolve all the problems in the world. Have you figured that out yet? Under the sun. What's under the sun like? It's a mess. We live in a world of chaos. That started in the Garden of Eden, and that's not going to change. One of the things Solomon says in the first chapter is, things that are crooked, what can you not do with things that are crooked? You can't make them straight. Anybody ever had a ding on your car? Now I'm talking about back when they made them out of real metal. In order to make that dent look like it's not a dent anymore, you had to drill holes and take metal out because things have been stretched. And once the metal's been stretched, you can't get it back to its original shape unless you take some drastic measure. You have to drill holes so that those holes, when you pull that metal back in place, will give that metal room to expand into that hole, and some of that excess that's been stretched will now be taken care of. Then what do you have to do? You got to cover it with either Bondo or fiberglass, and then you have to sand it down. You got to do a lot of camouflaging and a lot of repairs to get things back to the original. And then once you're finished, what is it not? It's still not the original. What about, apply that to us. We come into this world absolutely sinless, perfect little angels, but what is our inclination from the get-go because of our immaturity? Sin. It's not evil that we are, we're just immature, and so we seek our own. We want all the attention for us. And we continue that, and the older we get, the more sophisticated we get with being selfish. Does that sound weird? But is it not true? How sophisticated have you seen people get with selfishness? Hiding, now of course I'm not talking about me or you, I'm talking about other people. We get really sophisticated hiding things that we don't want other people to see because we know we don't want other people to see that because we're embarrassed about that, because we're a mess. How can you stop yourself from being a mess? You can't stop yourself from being a mess. You can make your best effort to do the right thing, but you're always going to be a mess. There. Will you sleep any easier tonight? Why did Jesus come? To save us from our mess, because we can't help ourselves. And when you become a Christian, now I'm going to be perfect for the rest of my life because I've got Jesus in my life and I'll never make another mistake. I'll never do any more sins. It's like, no, why do we need a doctor? Because we get sick and Jesus is a great physician. And we're sick all the time. So Solomon is talking about what's going on under the sun. It's a mess. You can't fix it. You can't change it. You can't even figure it out. We don't know why things are the way they are in every case. What else do I want to cover in these first 5 here? I want to look at some of these. It's one thing to talk about them. It's another thing to look at them. In chapter 1, look at verse 15. Mentioned this just a minute ago. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Our struggle with lack of control eats at us. Is it healthy to eat margarine? What's that? So is butter good for you? Okay, this week, butter's good for us. How about eggs? What's that? In moderation. This week, eggs are good for us. How about beef? Always. Beef is always good. Doesn't matter if it's been shot full of steroids and all that stuff. What I'm saying is, when we look at food, all you have to do is get on the internet and do just a short search about what things are healthy and what things are not. You're going to find opinions that are exactly 180 degrees opposite one another about what foods are healthy and what foods are not. It's a very frustrating thing when you're trying to look for healthy things to eat, because somebody's going to have something bad to say about whatever you're eating. And even if it's kale. Is kale good for you? Well, it has to be organic. And it has to be grown between these latitudes. And it has to be grown in this kind of soil. It's like, come on, really, just hand me a Snickers. It's almost like when you read Solomon, yeah, this is true. This is the way it is life today. I was talking to somebody yesterday, I think it was, about how they're teaching children in school and some of the techniques that are being used. And the idea came up, hey, mankind has been around, according to the Bible, for about 6,000 years. We don't have this education thing figured out yet. We're still trying to figure out how to teach kids to write and read. Really? Doesn't it seem like we ought to have some things down by now? But we don't. And no matter how well down we think we have it, somebody's going to come up with a new idea. But what does Solomon say about new ideas? He says multiple times, there is nothing new under the sun. Is that really true? Is it true? Now, is he talking about technology? He's not talking about technology. What does technology do for us? What's that? It advances certain aspects of our life. Does it advance our ability to travel? Exactly. Travel is, mankind's been traveling for years. There's nothing new. We can go faster. We can carry more stuff with us. It lets you be evil in more ways because you can get to the casino quicker or whatever you're doing. I don't know why. Uh-oh, Marty just said something bad about casinos. It's only gambling and drinking, that's all. But everything that we do, technology can enhance, but it doesn't really change the basic elements about what we're doing. We're still doing the same stuff, and it's really all the same. Everything changes and nothing changes. Have you ever heard that said? It's true, and Ecclesiastes seems to bear that out. Yes?
It's off, and that which was here has left a standard which we live by. That which is coming up sees that new standard and realizes, hey, we're doing the same thing they did. Our fate at the end is death, no matter who we are.
Right.
Coming or going.
Right. Now, let me ask you something about historical figures. Name a historical figure that's outstanding in your mind.
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. Let's talk about Abraham Lincoln for just a minute. What is significant about Abraham Lincoln?
16th president.
16th president of the United States of America. What else?
Free the slaves.
He's the guy responsible for freeing the slaves, by and large.
Some of them.
What's that? The slaves,
He's known
yeah.
for saving the Union mainly.
Right. And that was all involved. It was intertwined.
He was known for being honest.
Known for being honest. Yes, his moral compass shaped our country. Yeah, that's a true statement as well, John.
I just said he picked a bad day to go to the theater.
Picked a bad day to go to the theater.
Oh.
Yeah. What was his net worth when he died? What kind of a question is that? Who cares?
Yeah.
Is that significant about him?
No.
How many homes did he own?
Got a log cabin.
A log cabin. You can see one or two of them in through Indiana and Kentucky when you travel back that way. See, the thing that resonates with us about Abraham Lincoln were the moral impacts of his life. And he's just one guy we know about. Every other person in history, that's the same thing that we're going to come down to. How did they impact the life of humanity, so to speak? Nobody says, here's a historic figure, and he's historic because he was a rich guy. Well, we have some rich people in our history, but that's not necessarily the significant thing.
That makes them known.
Yes, name some rich people you can think of.
Rothschild.
Rothschild, what did Rothschild do? Was he just rich?
Ooh,
Or did he do something with his wealth?
not evil with it.
There's a fascinating show. It was on Netflix. I think that's where we saw it, if you've got Netflix. And I can't remember the name of it. I didn't think to make a note of it for this morning's class. But it's about, it was something like the men that built America. And it's these guys who started out with a small business, and they grew that business, and they became wealthy beyond imagination with the oil fields and the railroads and just everything, and finances. They made a lot of money, and you would know their names if you heard them, but the money that they had was not the thing. It's what they did with that money. And so when Solomon talks about everything being futile, well, all the stuff of this life and this world is futile. But it's what you do with it while you're here, with what you've got. Let's pull out some of these passages, especially these ones on man can't figure it out. Let's look at chapter 7, 13 and 14. Because why are we here? We're trying to figure stuff out. Solomon says we can't. Somebody read chapter 7, verses 13 and 14.
Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future.
Nobody can discover anything about their future, but what does he say about these things? If God's bent something, what about it? You're not going to straighten it out. Do you ever bend something for a good reason? I do that all the time. I'm a redneck engineer. I use a lot of baling wire and coat hangers. Coat hangers are my thing. I got a whole wad of them tied together over my workbench. Coat hangers are great. You can do a lot of stuff with coat hangers. Phyllis? Duct tape, same thing. Yeah, duct tape, coat hangers. But if God has put something together or made some changes, then it's not going to be changed. What about our future?
Based off choices.
Yes, but what's going to happen tomorrow?
Don't know.
No matter how good your choices are today, we still don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's what Solomon is saying. Drop down in the same chapter to verse 23. Solomon says this, I tested all this with wisdom. I said, I'll be wise. What's he say next? It was far from me. I'm going to approach this, and I'm going to approach it the smart way. Where's the smart way? It's like, okay, I can't get a hold of it. It's like that gnat in the kitchen. How can gnats be so fast? Do you ever think maybe God designed gnats the way he did to give us a lesson on life? You can't do that, Marty, unless you're a martial arts expert or something. What has been is remote and exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? I directed my mind to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and an explanation, and to know the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. Do you think he discovered it? Now here, he's going to make an interesting statement. See what you make of this. I discovered more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains. One who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. Behold, I've discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I'm still seeking, but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I've not found a woman among all these. Woo, glad he didn't make that statement today. Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices. What in the world is that all about? Tell me about Solomon's experience with women. He had a lot of them. Anybody remember how many? 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 total. Just 1,000 women. Where do you think he got these girls? I remember I was a young preacher. First permanent work I was at was in Bedford, Virginia, and this young lady from up the street, she was about 18 or 19. She called and said, "Marty, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure, come on down." I got a couple of lawn chairs. We sat out in the driveway. And she said, I just can't meet any good guys. I said, "Well, where are you meeting the guys that you're meeting?" She said, "In bars." I had a bruise on my head for about 3 weeks. Man. And it's like, you don't know? You haven't figured this out? If you're not looking for somebody who is following God, then you're not going to find somebody who is following God. Do you remember Solomon's history? What does the scripture say about his marriages? Where did he get most of those girls? They were political. They were political. He married these girls to have peace with these pagan heathen nations. And so he's drawing in all these heathen women. And so it makes perfect sense that he would say this if you know his history. But you have to know the context. He's saying, "Man, all these women, I haven't found one out of 1,000. I did find one man out of how many? 1,000. I wonder who that guy was. He didn't mention him by name. What kind of a statement is he making about humanity? It's not a very appealing one. What's happening to Brett Kavanaugh right now? Does everybody know the name? He's the appointee for the Supreme Court. What's the most they've been able to find so far? Yeah, when he was in high school, there was some girl that said, "He touched me." I don't mean the song, "He touched me." I mean, well, oh, parking ticket. Hey, did he pay it? Oh, we don't know if he paid that or not. We don't know if he can be on the Supreme Court. I'm thinking, when Paul wrote what he did about the armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6, he touched on this. The breastplate of righteousness. This is why it's so important to hear what Solomon says in his conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole of man. Some translations say the whole duty of man, but when you look at duty in the King James primarily, it's italicized, which means it's what the scholars thought should be there, but it's not actually in the text. The text just says fearing God and keeping his commandments is the whole of man. That's what it comes down to for us. And Solomon starts out, he's the king, and he's a rich king, and he brings all this stuff to himself. Look what he says in chapter 1. He can't figure it all out, but it's not because he hasn't tried. Chapter 2, I said to myself, "Come now and I'll test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself." And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, "It's madness," and of pleasure, "What does it accomplish?" I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven, this few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself. Doesn't this sound cool, guys? Man, what would it have been like if he'd have had a couple of bobcats? I don't mean the animals, I mean the little tractors. If he'd have had a D9 and some dozers, he could have really done stuff. But this is what he did with what he had, and it was fantastic. He made gardens and parks for himself, and he planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves, and I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. I also collected for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces, and I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. What's he telling us? A little bit of fornication going on there. King Solomon? What he's saying is, even when you go into things that are forbidden by God for men to enjoy, it's It's not forbidden because God doesn't want you to be fulfilled in those things. It's forbidden because it's going to hurt you. It's emptiness. It's futility. It's vanity. So Solomon is doing all this stuff, and he's writing it down for us, and he says, I just want you to know, in case you've got the idea, that if you win the lottery, everything's going to be great, because then the lottery will enable you to fulfill all your fantasies and have everything you've ever wanted. He's saying, I've done that. I've done it as the king, so nobody could lay a hand on me. And what is it? It's futility. It's emptiness. It's vanity. What's the only thing that has meaning?
His life as a Christian.
Yes. Yes.
His conclusion is right.
Yes.
But the way that he went through and the way that he got to that conclusion can, I think, be so beneficial for people that are not yet believers if they truly understand the text to see, hey, this guy wasn't just born into some kind of faith or whatever. He explored and exploited the world for everything it had and took it to its limits in every way that a person can.
Exactly.
And his conclusion at the end of that was, yeah, it's striving after winning. If you don't have a relationship with God, it doesn't matter. You can have everything.
Right. See, if you're talking to somebody who's born into poverty and stayed in poverty, and they say life is just meaningless, there's nothing to life, and you say, well, yeah, you've been poor all your life. Why couldn't you say that? And Solomon comes along, arrayed in gold, as Jesus said, and he said, everything under the sun, meaningless. I saw a hand in the back. I thought, Johnny.
In the preacher's own words, he says that he sought after wisdom, man's wisdom. And that's why it fell short.
Okay. Now, he also sought after God's because he asked God for wisdom when God said, of everything you can have, wealth, power, what do you want? And Solomon said, I'm going to be wise. And so God gave him wisdom. Now, this is an interesting point that Johnny makes, though. The wisest man in the world still did plenty of stupid things.
What he's trying to do here, because he's without God. Mankind's trying to do it himself. It's like us trying to seek salvation on our own. Without salvation being offered, we're futilely looking for something that cannot exist.
Yes. Now, I live in a house. Anybody else here live in a house? Okay. What's that house doing all the time?
Just sitting there.
It's sitting there. While it's sitting there, what's it doing? It's decaying, it's deteriorating constantly, and it constantly needs something to update it, to make it better, to keep it from leaking or something. I just noticed the other day, I thought I'd just repaired this thing at the back door, and I did. I cut out the bad wood at the bottom because it's on the west side, and it's somehow towards the north, gets a lot of water down there and gets wet and it rots out. So I cut that rotten stuff off and I replaced it with good. What's rotten again? Got to paint that thing. I thought we just painted that. How many times have you mowed this summer? And it's good that grass is growing, but it needs constant attention or it's just everything's going to be a mess. Everything. How about your kitchen? And you ladies have this fetish about the kitchen. I'm not leaving this house until that kitchen's clean. I know some people have that. I don't understand that at all. But I can leave anything dirty. That's Debbie. But stuff gets dirty and it gets a mess. Even when people who are trying to live godly lives are living there, everything crumbles. Everything comes to decay. That's the nature of this world. And the same thing is true spiritually if we're not building spiritually. We've got to be building things physically and repairing things physically to keep that going. But we're reading about Solomon saying that everything under the sun is futility, but then Paul comes along later when he's writing to the church at Corinth, and he says, what happens to the outer man? He decays. But the inward man is being renewed day by day. That in a nutshell is what Solomon is saying. Everything's vanity under the sun. But here's the conclusion of it. Fear God. Keep his commandments. And in that way, the inward man will be renewed every day. And you'll have something when life is over. What did Jesus say about treasure? Solomon's pursuing treasure. What did Jesus say about treasure? Don't lay up treasure on the earth. We used to rent the storage facility and have stuff in a storage thing. And I look back on that and I think, that's kind of goofy. You got so much stuff, you put it in a little room and you pay somebody to keep it, so in 3 years you go in there and you tear it all out and throw it away. Because you're never going to use any of that stuff. It's like, and I've been paying somebody to keep all my garbage. What we were talking about the other day, something, I don't want to throw that away. I want to take that home because I might need that someday. I won't throw that away for 5, 10 years, but I'll throw it away in 5 or 10 years because I've never used it. And I do that all the time. It's frustrating. What do you keep? What do you throw away? All these questions, and you never know. And if you want to know if you need it, just throw it away, because that's when you'll need it. This is the kind of stuff that Solomon is saying throughout Ecclesiastes. And here in the first part of the book, he says, I had the resources to provide everything for me that I wanted, and I didn't find anything in it. So if we're thinking that one of these days our ship is going to come in, here's what I think Solomon would say to us if he could come back today. He says, your ship came in. It was 2,000 years ago on the cross of Calvary. That was your ship. That was your salvation. That's what you put your hope in. And 3 days after that cross, there was an empty tomb. You guys have got it made. They didn't have that in Solomon's day. They were looking for a Savior to come. He didn't have the insight that we now have that, this life is a mess. And this life will end. One of my favorite things that he says is in chapter 7. And I gave you this outline on paper because I knew what I was going to do, and this is exactly it. Just go all over the place because there's so much interesting stuff in Ecclesiastes. Look what he says in chapter 7. Good name's better than good ointment. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. What's that all about? Okay. When's the last time you saw pink or blue balloons at somebody's house because somebody died? If it's a boy that dies, you put blue balloons out. If it's a girl, you put pink balloons out. Is that the way that works? No, Marty, that's stupid. That's for births. We celebrate births. We don't celebrate deaths. What's Solomon say?
I've just got a little side note. I can remember my dad. I lost my dad in death for a while back in the 70s. My brother and him had it almost constant. And there's so many different stories about people talk about the pastor back in the day when Japan. And there was one time my brother stole gas out of the preacher's car.
Stole gas out of the preacher's car?
Yeah, and the church right preacher, it used to be some preacher's last name, Preston, which just happened to my first name on it.
Right.
And I can remember my dad saying to my brother, couldn't you steal gas out of somebody else's car? And there was one time, and I can't remember all of it because it's been so long, but my brother comes in drunk, and here comes the police. And he runs through the house and he's stealing the car, police are stealing the car. Earl, he's in there and said, no, I'll bring you up to the police station tomorrow. Just all these many things that happen. But one of the things that I remember my dad always saying is, when we ain't got money, we got a good thing.
Right.
And then it was all, it was passage and listening to you guys talk about that. And it's so,
That's it. And when we look back in history, like a little while ago, some historical figure, well, who do you think of? This guy was he had a lot of stuff. Let's name him. No, it's got to be somebody who had an impact in history, whose name is good or significant for some reason. Those are the people that we gravitate towards, and that's what Solomon is saying here. Yes?
Death and what's not better than one, but said death is not better for one who lives to self, but it's a whole lot better for one who lives for God.
Right.
There's a comparison here.
And that, to me, that's a built-in assumption here, that we're not talking about dying as a rebel against God. We're talking about the potential in death, that death is better. Every birth into this world brings you into this place that is under the sun where everything is vanity. everything here is futility. We're bringing babies into this world because that's the way it's got to work. But we're bringing them into a place where as soon as they're born, we know, hey, they're going to die. What's the first thing we ask about a baby? Do they have all their fingers? Do they have all their toes? Why do we ask that? Because we know some children are born with birth defects. Some children don't come out whole. Some children don't come out healthy. And so we're concerned about, we made it past the first milestone. Now we got to keep them safe. Is there anything wrong with them? They wipe them off. What do? They take some blood. They check their vitals because they want to make sure this baby is healthy. Why? Because this is the world. And we know stuff happens bad all the time. They test them for diseases. They test them for jaundice. They do all this stuff. They check their bilirubin count. I don't know who that guy is, but he came up with some kind of a count, and so they check their bilirubin because the world's a mess. Everything here is vanity. Everything's striving after wind, and we got to take great effort to make sure everything goes as it should. But the day of one's death, finally get out of this place. Finally leave this world of pain and suffering. And here's the deal. You look at the beginning, and we don't even understand our beginning. Where did my soul come from? The only answer I have is God, but I don't know when it came about or how it came. He doesn't address that in here. He just lets us know we've got one. But I know the potential for where my soul can go. And He has provided that no matter what happens in this life, nothing can force me to abandon faith in Him, which is my ticket to eternal life. No matter what happens, nobody can trick me or take me away unless I allow that to happen. Now, people can keep me poor. People can keep me sick. People can keep me injured. People can keep me imprisoned. If they want to do those kinds of things to you, they can do it, but they can't take your faith. And if you've got your faith, you're good to go for eternity. And so looking at that, and then looking at what happens in this world, how long do we live here? We were just talking about Frank. Frank, you're almost 90. Does it seem like a long time? Doesn't seem like a long time. And in the grand scheme of things, if you live to be 100, how long is that?
Very short life.
Short life. You go back 100 years, where's that put you? 100 years ago, World War I had just ended. Wow, that seems like a long time. But when did Columbus discover America? 1492. Oh, that's a lot longer than that. When were the Crusades? Well, that's like 1,000 to 1,200, somewhere around in there. Ooh, that's even longer than that. When did Rome fall? Not Jerusalem, but Rome. About 410 AD. Wow, that goes back farther than that. Wow. When did Judah and Israel split? Oh, man. See, you just keep going back and back and back in time, and you see my life pretty short. How can there be a bell? Yeah, short. Time is short, and everything is vain except what we do in God's name. That's the way it comes.
Just the face of the earth, Psalms 104, verse 30. But after we die, we know the spirit goes back to God.
Yes.
That's the best part of this whole situation.
And he says that twice in here. He talks about the life of a dog or whatever that dies, and he goes to the ground. But spirit of man returns to God who gave it. And that, to me, is why the day of death is better than the day of birth. Because at our death, our spirit returns to the Lord. He's the only one who keeps things from being empty and vain and futile. Without God, everything is vain and futile. And so at death, we return to Him. It's not something to be afraid of. I mean, I'm not saying we should all want to die. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we should all know that, hey, if today's my day, I'm ready. If this is the day the Lord chooses for me, I'm ready, and I'm looking forward to seeing Him. Why did Jesus endure the cross according to Hebrews 12? for the joy set before him. Solomon's talking about the vanity of everything under the sun, and yet Hebrews writes about the joy set before Jesus. What was that joy? It had to be us. It had to be us. He endured the cross. He despised the shame, and so we have salvation through him. And everything is not meaningless unless we're only dealing with that which is under the sun. But there's a lot more to life than that. Paul?
We were taught in my family from a very young age that basically the whole thing is about faith. You realize that the whole thing is about faith. Good things happen, bad things happen. It doesn't matter, it's all about faith. And I think death is just one more event in that category. It's just about faith. How do you see your death? How are you feeling when you're getting close to death? It's just another opportunity to demonstrate faith.
Right. And if you start looking through the Bible and you look for that in people's lives, for instance, Joseph, how much did Joseph know about what was going on behind the scenes? He didn't know anything about what was going on behind us. Did he understand when his brothers sold him into slavery? Oh, this is great. I'm going down to Egypt. For long, I'm going to be second in command of the whole world. He didn't know that. He didn't have a clue. When Potiphar's wife lied about him and had him thrown into prison for a horrible crime that he didn't commit, that he's, oh, this is great. This is where I'm going to meet the guys who are going to help me meet Pharaoh. He didn't have a clue. It was all about faith. And through the Bible, everybody, it's the same thing. Did Saul live his life according to faith before he became a Christian? Well, he did what he thought was correct. And then when he was faced with his horrible error, he changed. We can live our lives in faith and make all the difference. And that's what Solomon is saying. Boy, this is horrible. One day on Ecclesiastes. My fault. Observations, questions? Carolyn?
I really never understood how people could say, you know, I'm ready to go when God wants me to. But watching James go through that, I understood it a lot more. Didn't make it easy, but I'm wondering will I ever get that confident as he was.
Right. Well, see, here's the thing about that. The only things that make me want to stay here are the things that are happening under the sun. Well, what about Debbie? I don't want Debbie to be stuck here without me because I know she's going to be hurt. My kids, it's going to hurt my kids. Why? Because they're here under the sun where there's pain and affliction and there's death and they have to face that. I don't want my grandchildren to grow up like I did, not being able to know my grandparents. The only grandparent I knew was my grandfather, and that was just really on a very thin basis. We never got to do stuff together. But I don't want my grandchildren to have to go through that. They're going to be stuck where? Under the sun, where everything is vain and futile. If I could take them with me, if at death, God said, all right, Marty, it's time for you to die, but here's the deal. You can take your family with you right now. All right, let's go. Everybody get on the bus. Well, what about we wanted to go to Disney World one more time? Hey, Don. Right.
We get stressed because we do that. Or something's going to happen. Oh no. And I get stressed because it's not going to work out. Or I'm going to lose my house if this happens. Or if I lose this, or I got to hang on to this, I got to hang on to that. And so really all I really want to do is ourselves. How much faith do I have in myself? Not very much. Because I'm always getting stressed over this worldly stuff. I mean, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. Sometimes at night I have to sit down and I have to regroup and say, you know, it just doesn't happen. You got it under control. Just let me be faithful to you.
Isn't that a hard balance to find, though? Because you got to be responsible at work, but how responsible and how much rests with you? I don't know.
Yeah, you got to get things done, but how do you approach it?
Yeah. So, bottom line is, our class on Ecclesiastes is over, and we're not going to figure out anything. So, everything's vain and futile. Just fear God and keep His commandments, and you'll be okay. Thank you for being here.